Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for joining me. I'm Alastair Herbert. I'm the founder of Linguabrand, and we're a brand articulation consultancy based in London and England. And I'm going to share some secrets with you about the psychology of persuasion and how you can start to connect with consumer emotions in the way that you talk about sustainability. So I'd like to share my screen with you so you can see what we're going to talk about. And I'll talk about this over 20 minutes. Any questions, please just follow up with those. So fundamentally, what we're about is rapidly improving brands' articulation so that you can differentiate better and connect your creative to consumer psychology. And the way that we do this is to work through three strands, which are about analyzing verbal analytics, because language is full of psychological strengths and insights, semiotics, which is the analysis of deeper cultural issues, and also visual analytics. And I'm a brand and strategy expert. And I always was motivated by the idea of how do we differentiate brands if we don't understand what makes them the same, and getting under the skin of big ideas in order to connect to consumers. So the way that we work on this is really to ask, well, why psychology and deeper listening? What's so important about the psychology rather than just the functional side? And it's because brands live inside people's heads. In fact, brands aren't real, and it's sometimes difficult for us working in brands to remember that they're just imaginary constructs that live and die in people's heads. So when we say we're rebranding, we're not actually rebranding, because we can't reprogram inside people's heads unless we understand what's happening there. And the other thing that's really important is that you can't always trust what comes out of people's mouths. And over years and years and years, the default setting has been to run focus groups. But we are much more interested in understanding about the wealth of psychological information that's contained not in what people say, but how they say it, and to help you then understand what that means about sustainability and the way that you talk about that and you share those things with people. So first of all, I'm going to introduce you very quickly to our deep listening robot, Bob, and he's our most productive consultant. Now, Bob is based on the work of leading psychologists and language analysts, and he listens to two sets of things. First of all, to consumers. So listening to understand without asking questions how people have, what attitudes people have got towards change, how they link things to social areas. There's sensory preferences, which I'm going to share some work we've done in spirits, particularly with malt whiskies and some rums, to give you some ideas about this. People's emotional states, their information processes, preferences, and their deeper framing. And this is a really, really important element when you're explaining to people what you're doing in terms of making the planet a better place, and what you're doing for your brands and with your companies. And with brands as well, it's really important to understand that consumers always have choice. So if you're going to differentiate a brand, it's really important to understand how to quantify generics versus differences, because what we've discovered is that most brands are spending 2/3 of their money selling generics and only 1/3 selling their differences, where actually it needs to be the other way around. You should be selling 1/3 difference and 2/3 similarity. So here's one of the issues. Okay, so when we're talking about sustainability, are you just going to say the same as everybody else, or are you going to start connecting and saying things differently? So when we're talking about these big ideas, we talk about how people frame these big ideas, and the sorts of things that we work on. We've worked with Beam Suntory on understanding what makes a malt whiskey a malt whiskey. I'm going to share you a little bit of that with you. Also with Edrington, what makes a rum and not a malt whiskey? We've understood how women think about breast cancer just by listening to their blogs. We've understood how, for Kellogg's, how people are framing the idea of breakfast, for Johnson & Johnson around motherhood, for Cadbury's about what it is to be a trusted New Zealand brand, for Adidas, what is their view of sport and the way that their customers and their consumers think about sport as compared to people from Nike. For banks, in understanding how do you communicate about being helpful, and for Samsung in helping them be able to ask the questions that prompt dissatisfied Apple customers to change. And in fact, by doing that, we tripled Samsung's rates of change just by altering the way that they spoke, by relating back to the way that consumers think. So if you stick with me, what I'm going to show you is 3 sustainability don'ts, 3 sustainability do's, and then I'm going to take you through 3 secrets of storytelling, which will be at the heart of communicating what you're doing for your brands and your companies, and making the world better. So first of all, what are the psychological, verbal and visual triggers for a single malt whiskey? So what is telling these consumers here that what I'm drinking is a malt whiskey and not a blend, or even a cognac or a premium rum? So let me take you through what we did. Single malt whiskies, we discovered, when you ask people this, they'll say, well, it's made out of different things. But actually, the psychological framing of a single malt whiskey is that it is a religion. So what I'd like would be to show you exactly how this works. Okay, so they're made in remote locations and all have their founding myths. Strong male communities. This is it's like a monastery. Carry on, dedicated to their tasks. There's contemplation and work shines in. There's always a unique resource and ritual. So each malt whiskey is effectively one particular type of monastery. There's a head man, nearly always a head man, who understands all of these mysteries, and consumers are invited on a pilgrimage, and you can join the order if you are a true believer, and the fruits of their labors glow spiritually. And do you know what happens if you have a really successful whiskey brand? You go into Jim Murray's Whiskey Bible. So this is absolutely a point about what makes a malt whiskey a malt whiskey, and this is important for understanding sustainability, and I'll move on to that. Underneath, it was very clear listening to consumers that there was a shift from roughness to smoothness, which reflected both the process of making a malt whiskey, and also this underlying religious idea about religion being something that makes somebody a better person and takes away our brutishness and turns us into more gentle people. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this next slide. But these shows the absolute generics for a single malt whiskey. Okay, and the absolute generics, what the single malt whiskey looks like, what the emotional engagement and how it's anchored. I'm going to now talk very quickly about rum before we move on to sustainability. So what makes rum a rum? Rum is safe adventure. It's a dynamic between a civilized world and a wilder place with different rules. And rum's job is to hold that place in consumers' mind where those two worlds can meet. And rum is the only spirit that can do that in the category. And then underneath this, there's a journey of a founder to a place of richness. So I'm showing you these to demonstrate to you that if you listen deeper and you understand how people are thinking and framing these ideas, you can start to make these connections and you can start to understand how to spend your money more efficiently. So the big question then is, what is the psychology of sustainability? Well, there's a big confession. We don't know. We spent a lot of time trying to get brands to spend some time with us to get beneath the idea of what sustainability is. And I'm going to show you why sustainability in itself is a bad idea for communicating to consumers. And I'm going to share that, and I'm going to give you these clues. Okay, so first of all, we've done a lot of work, incidentally, on this area. We've been working with a yoga brand recently that deals that works with organic cottons and bamboo, and we've worked with branding agencies like Landor on understanding what the idea is of greenness and what's behind it. And it's open to such massive interpretation. It's incredibly important that you don't believe that people are going to understand what you're talking about. Okay, so the first don't preach from the top down. This is really important. People do not want to be told that what they ought to do, or that you are telling people that they should be doing something. In many ways, consumers are abdicating their personal responsibility to brands. Okay, so we need to do things for them, and that's why they will help. Well, they'll feel comfortable choosing us. So don't preach to them. Secondly, don't make a big performance of it. Okay, so what you're doing, don't go out and become boastful. Don't make a big fuss about it, because it opens you up to risk. Okay, so all of these don'ts are about risk avoidance, and I'm going to show you how to work out how to get better at moving beyond the risk. But don't forget the converted. By that, I mean the interest groups. By that, I mean the influencers. Okay. It's important because these people are very, very, very influential, and they can turn consumers against you. So be aware that the converted people do have a big voice, and you need to be conscious of the ways that they could the ways that they could pick up on your sustainability, credibility not being as good as it could be. Okay, the second one is the do's. Okay, now this is much more important. So this is how you should be communicating what sustainability is about, and you're going to see what those are about. It's working from the bottom upwards. So it's no point talking big. You need to be doing things every single day that are improving the things that you are doing. Work from the bottom upwards, but focus on people and not on processes. Now, you would have heard a lot today and yesterday about the processes that you need to get right to be better at delivering on planet-friendly and eco-friendly answers. Okay, now these are really, really important as business inputs. But when it comes to consumers and talking to your customers, it's really important that you focus on the outputs, not what the processes do, but what they result in. And thirdly, the most important thing is about sharing your stories. So it's not about preaching from the top down. It's about sharing your stories from the bottom up. And sometimes it's worth keeping some of these quiet for when you need to be able to bring them out. Or if you feel your credibility is weak and you need to start building up on these, then start to just over time, make sure you've got these stories to tell. Now I'm going to show you 3 secrets about storytelling, and these are really, really important. I'm going to go into detail on these. The first one is avoid abstract head words. Okay, I'll show you what those are. Sustainability is one of them. The second one is to use a lot of sensory language, because people respond to sensory language. And the other thing is to persuade people with picture language. And I'm going to talk about those 3 things: head words, body words, and picture words. So head words are conceptual ideas that have multiple definitions, and you can see that sustainability is one of those. What do these things mean? Responsibility is a word that's used very often with wines and spirits. What does that mean? It's important that you don't get locked into these words, and this is the reason why. It's because our brains hate dealing with concepts, but brands love these concepts, and this is the reason why. I love this picture because this is what you're doing to consumers when you start talking about sustainable responsibility. It's like throwing their brains into the deep end and saying, swim out. Okay, let's make it easier. And the way to make it easier is to use more body words, so sensory language relating to smell, sight, sound, touch, and taste. So if I use words like kick or kiss, I'm actually firing up your motor systems. So using sensory language, which there's a lot of in wines and spirits, particularly around the ideas, obviously, of taste, but also of smell. But it's important when you're thinking about telling your sustainability stories to make them about people and to make them about senses. It's difficult for brands to own sensory language. And the most important thing to remember, though, is that a good multi-sensory experience is always more satisfying than the single one. And the point about this is that when we're dealing with digital conversations, really we've only got what we look like and what we sound like. Look at the difference between these two pictures. One is a store and one is online. And what's the difference? People. Okay, too often there's no people. So make sure you involve people and make sure that you use your voice as well as you use the way that you look. But the most powerful words are those that work in pictures, because our minds work in pictures. So brands, malt whiskey is a religion. Rum is safe adventure. We found this out through Bob and our cultural semiotics analysis and our visual analysis, because this is the way that people are talking about it. It's the way brands are talking about it, just below the surface. So these are really important. And I'm going to show you how, if you connect your brand's communications to the pictures that people are using about sustainability, about the way that you're communicating with people, then you make a big relationship. So I'm going to ask you a question. Have you ever seen somebody really good looking, maybe in a bar, maybe at work, maybe you're out traveling, maybe at a party or something, and then they've opened their mouths? And within a minute or so, your interest has gone. This is what's happening with brands. And this is what's happening. We're spending all of our money on what we look like and not enough about how we're articulating and talking about what we need to do. And why this doesn't make sense, not only is it because we've only got two senses to work with, the most important predictor of relationship starting is actually matching the language styles. You're 3 times more likely to make a relationship with somebody if you match their language styles. So you are actually matched. I suspect the people that you've chosen to be with in your life, your friends, your lovers, your partner, it's because you match language styles. And this also promotes loyalty too. So you're twice as likely to be together with somebody who matches language style. So this is why it's so important. We need to work more on for sustainability to understand it, but this is what's really important. And I'm going to sum this up in 5 words for you to improve your communication of sustainability. Be less Pope and be more Mother Teresa. Thank you so much for sharing the time with me. I hope you've enjoyed what we've been saying. And if you have any questions, please just ask away. Okay, sorry, does anybody have any questions that I could help you with on that? These frames work across all cultures. Actually, it's really important to recognize that. Every culture, we use pictures to describe what we're thinking and feeling. I can send you some stuff that we've done with COVID, for example. Everybody has been thinking about COVID in terms of a battle. We're in a container, which is when we have it. Then there's a battle with the disease, but when we're coming out, it turns into a journey. So these things are absolutely consistent across cultures, because when we're brought up, we start to think in these pictures, and these are physically realized in our brains. So I hope very much that you've enjoyed this. If you'd like to discover more, you will find some videos on our website at linguabrand.com. And I very much look forward to hearing from you, and I hope it's gone very well, and that you've enjoyed the whole of the conference, and that this has been helpful for you. And I'm very happy to say this. Thank you very much, everybody.